ladies and gentlemen. It's BIA Kelsey live, and of course, you know by this time that the Chicago Cubs have won the World Series. That 108 years of fan desperation. You can still hear them clapping. They love this so much. They're having a parade today in Chicago, and congratulations, Cubs. But our topic is local media, local marketing, and local commerce. I'm joined today by Mike Boland, our chief analyst. He's in San Francisco. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. I'm the senior analyst for the local on-demand economy at BIA Kelsey, and I'm in Lakewood, Washington. Wherever you are, we hope that you enjoy the show. And if you have questions you want to ask, please feel free to jump on and do so with the live feed. And we'll be posting this for archival listening as well. So let's just jump right into the news summary for this week, Mike. First up, Facebook reported some pretty astounding earnings. The company's Q3 earnings this year the total profit was $2.38 billion, which was 3 times as much as a year ago. And that grew on a total user base of 1.79 billion users. So roughly about a fourth of the people in the world are using Facebook now.
Yeah.
They had 59% year-over-year growth in revenue, and 84% of that revenue came from mobile. This all also adds up to about $15.65 per user in revenue per month, which is an astonishing accomplishment from my perspective. I think that MySpace and the previous generations of social companies generally made at most $3 to $6. So this is really an order of magnitude increase. What do you think about what we saw, and where do you see the limitations potentially popping up for Facebook?
Yeah, limitations is the key question, because on its surface, this was a blockbuster quarter, but it's kind of a double-edged sword in a few ways. So yes, you mentioned 59% year-over-year revenue growth. I think even more notably, 160% year-over-year profit growth. And yeah, most of that is advertising, which gets to some of the limitations, which I'll get to in a second. So most of that is advertising. Mobile now makes up 84% of that advertising share, as you pointed out. And that aligns with our forecast that we just released. We actually, so this is up from 78% in Q3 2015. So it's year-over-year growth in mobile share of revenue can be seen to be plateauing, because it hasn't gone up from last quarter. We have it plateauing at around 87%. So I think it'll continue to tick up, but it'll slow down a bit. So among its 1.79 billion monthly users, 66% of those are daily actives, which I think is another key point of what they mentioned, because over the last year or so, they've gotten a lot of flack that they're losing day-to-day user engagement to things such as Snapchat. This kind of shows that that's not the case. If 66% of its monthly actives are also daily actives, that's another kind of plus in the plus column. I guess we're going through plus and minus columns here.
Well, so let me ask about the daily actives. Do you think that might be a function of the presidential election? Because I know that's where a lot of people are dwelling on this topic and writing and reading constantly. Do you think that we may also be seeing some cyclicality that they should expect in the future?
I would agree with that if it was like 40% last quarter and jumped up.
Right.
I think it's been fairly consistent. And the fact is that people have expected that to go down, and it's remained at around 2/3 of its monthly actives are daily actives. But another interesting milestone, it hit 1 billion users that are mobile only, which I think indicates that they're really doing a good job growing in emerging markets, which is what they need to do, because speaking of maturity and plateauing, their U.S. user base is very much plateauing. So they're seeing growth overseas in markets where that desktop usage has been leapfrogged by mobile only. Now, that's most of the pluses. Now let's go back to the negative column. Despite all of that, its share price shrunk about 8% in after-hours trading after the announcement. And the reason for that is, behind all of those good numbers is a very important factor, is that they've approached maximum ad load in terms of their ad inventory and usage and all that. So that suggests a couple things. One is, and we also very much put this built this into our mobile forecast, a lot of its revenue growth and the growth of native social advertising in general is going to have to come off network for Facebook in its third-party affiliate publisher network known as Facebook Audience Network, or FAN. So that's one of the things it's going to have to continue to build. The second thing is that it's not as diversified as it should be for, the fact that, again, it's reaching maximum ad load, which is a big deal if the majority of its revenue is from advertising. So it's going to have to diversify a bit. And that small slice of advertising that now goes to, small slice of revenue that now goes to non-advertising, which is like transactional stuff and payments, is going to have to grow as a percentage. And that means some of the things it's doing on a more transactional basis, such as chatbots. And I know you have a lot to say about that as well.
Well, so that's a great point. So they've already launched 33,000 chatbots, which is how small businesses are starting to, and brands, of course, are starting to automate essentially the transition from being on Facebook, looking at content, to getting engaged with the brand or business. The way I would describe a chatbot these days, it's like the guy that you sent out in front of the curtains to do the tap dance during a stage change in a vaudeville show, right? And so the chatbot is sort of keeping you entertained while they get ready for you with a customized experience or at least a targeted experience to deliver to you. The chatbot is also the beginning of the transaction process, which is the key, I think, to building the transaction revenue and driving the local investments they've made in pages recently.
That's exactly right. And we'll include links with this video of some of the analysis we've done around chatbots, including an analyst brief and a conference session at our May show. But yeah, absolutely. The transactional stuff, not just chatbots, but even like throughout other mobile interfaces such as Facebook pages. We talked, I think it was last week or the week before, about more of the transactional features that are coming into Facebook to buy, book, or reserve something right within that Facebook page rather than kind of go somewhere else to do it. So I think that transactional stuff is going to allow them to diversify more and get beyond that challenge that they've approached maximum ad load, one, and two, advertising makes up the majority. It's like 90+% of the revenue. So yeah.
Well, and that ties into the second topic today, which is the update that Uber did to its apps, both on Android and iOS, which essentially mimic to some extent the Facebook page's local capabilities. Now you'll be able to schedule an Uber ride in your calendar or have it populate your calendar. They have built in essentially the whole experience of finding and getting a car is a lot easier, and in expressing where you want to go using some machine intelligence, they're hoping to be able to say, well, you're headed home, or because you're at home, you must be headed to work. Those kinds of recommendations could be extended into a lot of other things when you start thinking about the combination of location and intent. And I think they're beginning the analysis of that, but they aren't there yet.
Yeah.
So Uber's tool is much easier to use, but the back end and what that represents is really interesting. What do you see them potentially doing to compete and build their revenue? And I know they've made some different decisions than Facebook about when to use transactions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, a lot of these announcements they just made are front-end things, but I think, to your point, they represent a lot of back-end implications. So first of all, kind of panning back, this is their first major design and UI update since 2012. So what they've done is I think that they've followed a lot of the kind of trending in the mobile app world towards essentially reducing friction for users. Less taps, less from a UI perspective, but also, to your point, from a machine learning perspective, suggesting things, knowing where you're going rather than have you actually type it in. So I think one common theme here is a lot of just kind of reducing friction for users. A lot of other just kind of cool little features such as...
Well, let's dig in on that just a little bit, because this is called Where To, and right now in the demo says you're picking up a car. Do you want to go to work, home, or the gym? And that's based on an analysis of your schedule.
Yeah, and
that same machine learning,
usage.
Right? And that machine learning could be used to provide recommendations to somebody who's getting in a car and just wants to go to a good club, or wants to go to a good dinner, or is looking for something to do. So it's obviously the same sort of general direction that Facebook is going, but I don't think their intent is the same, and the features point to that.
Yeah, the features do point to that. They explicitly said on the earnings call that they're not going for like an advertising type of play or an ad-supported model where they're going to like lead you to McDonald's because your
Right.
behavior suggests you might like McDonald's. And I actually believe them.
Hmm.
Usually there's a lot of BS that happens on those calls. The reason I believe them is that they have a much larger opportunity and a much larger, I guess, thing to defend or to protect,
Hmm.
which is they're sitting on a pretty sweet business model when it comes to their service fees for and
Right.
that's based on growing a network. And you see
Hmm.
competition from Lyft and others. So though they could get some incremental revenue from bringing in this kind of like directional advertising and
Right.
suggestions, I think that it's not as much as they stand to lose by lessening the experience for users. Now you could argue that it's
Yeah.
additive to suggest stuff, but I think that's bullshit. Whenever people say that the
You can
advertising,
get
if it's
carried away.
targeted enough, like will be useful to users. It's still ads, and let's call it what it is. But
Yeah.
anyway, so I think that they're not going to go down that path, and they
Mm.
might like eventually when their current model matures in terms of revenue growth. This is a viable way for them to kind of continue their revenue growth through advertising. But in the meantime, they're all about network growth, getting users, and they have some pretty strong margins when it comes to the service fees they're getting. So I think that they want to stay focused on that. Now that said, the machine learning and predictive stuff is
Yeah.
absolutely going to be used for things other than like sending you to commercial locations. I think,
Hmm.
if you're leaving work and 90% of the times that you leave that location, you go to a specific place such as maybe your home or the gym as you pointed out.
Right.
The app just knowing that just based on your
Hmm.
past behavior and using that past behavior as a predictive way to say we know you're going here to just again reduce the amount of taps that you have to type in because it kind of knows where you're going.
And it reflects a service mentality that I think is really important. That a lot of people have cluttered up
Yeah.
by putting in all the other kinds of offers and trying to exploit opportunities. And to your point, I think this is really an opportunity to stake out an area they can go after at the point that the core growth starts to decline.
Yeah. Now
The
another
question is whether they'll be disciplined and stick to that, because I think
yeah,
you're absolutely right. They could ruin the business by being
getting a
interrupted.
little too greedy for short-term additional revenue from ad stuff. I
Right.
agree, and I think they're focused on the long term. But another few things that deserve attention before we move on, just from like a bells and whistles feature perspective, I thought it was pretty cool. Some of the things that when you're waiting for your car, it'll actually show you the color of the car
Right.
on the map interface. Not a huge deal, but kind of cool. Another cool feature was you can now like once someone opts in, like your wife or your girlfriend or your kids or whomever, when they
Mhm.
opt in to share their location with you, you can use them as an actual map destination and say like,
Yeah,
take
I
me
want
to
to
my
get there.
girlfriend, and then
Hmm.
instead of a fixed location on the map, it takes you to wherever she is. It's a cool feature for me. I don't know if she's gonna like that, but it's just taking you to someone else and having that person, of course, once opted in, be an actual location. I think that's a cool concept that could start to, I don't know, breed other features.
So the new commitment question is, sweetheart, may I surveil you?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the answer is no most times if
Yeah.
phrased that way.
Well, but you're right though. The awareness of where our family is. I mean, so think about a more emergent situation like there's been an earthquake in San Francisco. I've lived through that, and if Uber, which would theoretically stay operational because of the cell network, was the way that you were to find everyone was safe. Maybe not get to
Yeah.
them, but find out they were safe, and use Uber to maybe get somewhere. That's a profound customer experience that will change their relationship with the brand forever. It'll raise a level of trust. Now, on a day-to-day basis, it might be a little creepy, but when the chips come down, this kind of awareness, the app can possibly be really assistive.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm really intrigued by this. I think the other thing that they need to think about as they make these improvements is, given all these other revenue opportunities that are represented here, are there ways for them to either start to share that revenue with the drivers so that they are more incented to drive for Uber? And we know that driver retention is a key issue for them.
Yeah.
Or do they potentially even allow the driver to do some of that stuff on their own in order to keep it out of the brand experience? Or will the drivers potentially start to do that, like shill for Yelp?
Yeah. That's kind of been an ongoing question. Can drivers do things like have signage in their car,
Mhm.
for display advertising and things
Right.
like that. And I think that Uber's terms of service to keep a very, consistent passenger experience
Right.
is to not let drivers do that. But I think that's been an ongoing question. Can drivers do these like extra revenue
Mm-hmm.
things for themselves? And I think, I think Uber is going to continue to try to, as much as it can, prevent that to keep, the driver experience pure. Or I keep saying driver experience, the passenger experience pure.
Yeah. Well,
But you're
go
right.
ahead.
Like catering to the drivers is important to them. They're doing this balancing act of catering
Mm-hmm.
to
Right.
customers and drivers, and it's kind of serving two masters. And in some markets, it's more important to build up their network that is supply driven to have enough drivers. So that
Right.
compels them to be more driver centric, driver friendly, and it's different in every market. So it's that balancing act they're continuing to walk.
Well, and I think that's for all the marketplaces, all the labor
Yep.
marketplaces. They're starting to wrestle these questions. It's not simply about how little they can pay the labor, but it's how that they can help that labor improve not only their skills but their lifestyle, so that they want to stay.
Yeah.
And in many cases, that means, and if you think about the basic assumption of the on-demand economy, that we value flexibility and the opportunity to work when we work, it makes sense for the drivers to want to combine Uber work with other kinds of things they can do,
I agree.
especially if they're good at like hand-to-hand sales. You really ought to try this restaurant. That kind of thing could be a big benefit to the restaurant and some marketer, but it could pay the driver a little bit more, and that would change the calculus of going to work for Uber.
I guarantee Uber does not like the idea of passengers getting pitched while
Yeah.
getting driven
I
somewhere.
agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Although I'm not
Yeah.
sure that they can say they can't do it
Oh
either,
yeah, sure. But
because
actually,
that makes them an employee.
in a roundabout way, they have created a system that prevents that, because if it does end up being a suboptimal passenger
You get a bad-
experience, you get a
bad
bad
rating.
review, and then that person
Right.
gets kicked off the system. So in a roundabout way, there is
And,
prevention for that.
but I would imagine at some point that people will figure out how to do it in a non-rude way.
Sure.
When I talk to drivers, a lot of them do it for social reasons, because they work all day and they don't meet or talk to anybody. And so
I have lots of chatty drivers, and I don't mind that.
Oh, no, it's great. But I think that's also where you start creating the venue in which it's not sales, but you could just, say, I also do this, or I can help you do this.
Sure.
The app intends to do it. I would imagine the drivers will be the first one to do it.
Yeah. Well,
So-
the moment I step into an Uber and they say, please watch this 5-minute video on my new timeshare offer.
Oh,
for
no,
you."
no, 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 no,
Once
no,
that
no.
starts to happen.
No, I don't want the New York taxi experience where you get in and you're
Right.
harangued by a Broadway star.
Yeah.
So that brings us to the last one. So why don't you talk about this one
Yeah.
first? We're talking about location APIs.
Yeah, so our friends at Yext have done something I believe is very logical, which is to open up their location database and their product API essentially to third parties who want to build these kind of custom integrations and custom use cases for kind of bespoke apps
Right.
using Yext's very valuable location data. And as a quick background for those unfamiliar, Yext aggregates lots of location data, keeps it accurate, keeps it scrubbed, and then fans it out to several different directions. One of the
Right.
challenges longstanding with location data is it keeps getting changed in different places, and all the different listings that show up on Google and Yelp and all these other places, they want
Yep.
to kind of be the central source so that any mistakes and updates and all that kind of information scrubbing happens in one central place before it fans out into a million places. And companies can use Yext to essentially publish all that data and make sure it's accurate. So anyway, what they've done is essentially they realize that the core primary use case is everything I just mentioned, but there's also lots of other different applications for this valuable location data. So one example that they gave, Howard Lerman, the example, the CEO, the example he gave was that, if there is a kind of Zendesk situation that's being used for customer service, it can tie in the Yext API to be able to have a customer service event triggered when
Right.
a 1-star review is kind of lodged somewhere on Yelp. The business itself or its agency can be alerted right away through Zendesk, and that happens through the Yext API. So I think two things I'll mention, then kick it back over to you, is that one thing that this will do is it will create a lot more use for the data and allow that data to scale.
That's key.
And then also, and I guess that is the same as my second point, which is that Yext on its own does not have the ability to kind of build all these custom integrations. And they realized, because people kept coming to them and saying, can you build us this? Can you build us that?
Right.
And they would do it for custom large jobs. But then they realized, if we just release the API, it can really just like blossom the amount of use cases for this. So that's
well, and that's the advice we've been giving a number of clients as well. For example, Soleo is another BIA Kelsey client who just released a location API, but based around their listings business, which creates phone call opportunities. Yeah. And what I think this allows both of these companies to do, and any company thinking about how do they concentrate on what their core value proposition is, especially if it's data-driven, is to let other people figure out the creative ways to put that information to use and focus on making the information itself as accurate, complete, contextually relevant, and available. And at that point, their businesses can operate almost on automatic from a product development standpoint. Obviously, they're going to want to continue to develop services for merchants, but for app developers, all they need to be able to do is make a different call to the API in order to add new capabilities. And that means that data, as you said, gets used a whole lot more. Yeah. And that translates into revenue for all of these companies.
You're right. And it's also analogous to what Foursquare has done in different ways than what you're saying. But the overall announcement is analogous to what Foursquare has done, because it's the overall play of using this location data for things other than listings and advertising. And, Pinpoint is Foursquare's kind of location-based ad platform. It realized, as a byproduct of all of this great data it's getting and like insights on where consumers are going in the aggregate, it's now starting to work with equity analysts as like valuable intel that might be leading indicators for trends that they want to use for investment. Like, for example, if a certain location or a certain geography where a bunch of franchises are, if they're all of a sudden starting to see an uptick in activity, that might trigger some sort of investment opportunity for equity analysts, who are always looking for that edge and that data-driven edge for just leading indicators for trends. So I guess my overall point is that all of this great data that we've been looking at for years in the kind of location space, and it's mostly used for advertising, is now being used for all these other things. It makes a lot of sense.
That's the really multiplicative opportunity society is looking at right now with regard to the use of all this data.
Yeah.
We're going to see this from mapping companies generally. Asset tracking, which is tracking stuff in the world, is going to be another big area. Those will all be exposed by mapping services through APIs. Just think about the logistic information that you get from doing that.
Yeah.
That becomes something that you could sell to an analyst, or you could sell down market to people who are going to be planning how much of your stuff they're going to sell. There's a lot of ways to use it to either improve the experience or to make more money.
Yeah, well, make more money. That's where I was going to go. When used at like such a mass scale, some of that information in terms of like fleet management, small efficiencies can really add up. I always use the example that, when Amazon crunched the numbers and realized that all the left turns that its trucks were making and had to go around the block and all that, when added up, it basically created a rule that, in terms of its routing, that they don't make left turns. And it was like $1 million in savings, or it was multi-million. I forget the exact number, but the point is that, the data that revealed that logistical snag ended up being something that allowed them to take action for real bottom line results for operational efficiencies.
And just in gas savings.
Yeah.
And time savings. So, that is actually the basis on which Starbucks made its location decisions for the past 8 years, too. Avoiding a left turn. They build stores where the most people can turn right into them.
Yeah.
And that resulted in a major increase in their market penetration and better penetration within individual markets.
Yeah.
Because they would build them across the street, but you're taking a right turn.
Yeah, and speaking of kind of franchise locations, another place this location and user behavior data can be used, and I've talked to Foursquare about this, and Xad's already doing it, is use the intelligence of where there are regions where a brand or a franchise has a high affinity but under indexes for presence, right? Like there's a lot of McDonald's fans in my neighborhood, but there's not a McDonald's. So to be able to use that information in the aggregate for it's basically called franchise development. It's these franchises knowing where to put the next location is a major science, and a lot of this data assists those decisions as well.
Well, we're going to be a smarter society in the long run. I think that's really what we're talking about. But all these APIs are going to need to be exposed. They're going to need to be easy to use, well documented. And the app developers' challenge is not to try to change everything themselves, but to take and recombine data to create novel solutions.
Yep, and I hope there isn't a McDonald's that opens in my neighborhood. By the way, that was a bad example.
Your neighborhood would not do well with a McDonald's.
Yeah. Well, the data will indicate that.
Well, it might not, though. It might say there should be a McDonald's right next to Mike's house, which would ruin the Presidio. Yeah. Well, that's the end of the news summary. Next week, we are not going to be on air because I have to be out of the office at a conference, which Mike, incidentally, will be attending. So neither of us will be in the office, but we'll be back on Thursday, the 17th of November, and have a guest coming up that week. Remember, we have BIA Kelsey Next, our show in Boston. It's on December 5th through 7th. Please join us. Check out biakelsey.com to find more information about that, and we look forward to talking to you next time.